Good morning, all of you. This is going to be the discussion, elaborate discussion on the basis of beginning theory by Peter Barry, post-colonial criticism. We are going to deal with this particular theory, the movement as well as theory in detail, based on the text as prescribed for you for your graduate course. Post-colonial criticism. It is not something new for you because already the post-colonial literatures as a paper you got introduced to already, and you know the assumptions, precepts, everything in detail already well. Still, to approach something as theory or to learn something as theory, especially in a deeper level, is very important and urgent. So that we are going to have a look at the theory in detail. So, post-colonial criticism emerged as a distinct category only in the 1990s. Think about Indian independence. So, post-colonialism, what do you mean by the term post-colonialism? Wherever you come across this term post and after that you have an attached term, means after that particular, this post-colonial means after colonial. And you know how this hyphenation in between post and the next term is very significant when you talk about writing that together. We discussed this even before along with the postmodernism, post-structuralism, where post-colonialism can be the body, the whole. It is not actually differentiated on behalf of certain time period. It can be wherever colonialism did exist, that colonial experience after post-colonial, that after the experience after that colonializing project or colonializing experience. This is what you mean by post-colonialism without a hyphen, post-colonial without a hyphen, term together, written like a single one, in a single form. But if you are differentiating or if you are separating those two with a hyphen, that is post, it refers to a particular time period, post-colonialism, if it is from 1910 to 1948, exactly after that. But the other one is more broad. Without hyphen, it becomes more broad. Like even the colonial nations that certain nations are even attributed with a colonial status now. But there had been a time when they also had been under the colonial imperialistic regime of different other nations. So this can refer, that's why post-colonialism as a term without hyphen can refer to that whole and vast broad experience of being colonized, or that what is after that, the experience after that, in whichever temporal point it may be, you can incorporate all those experiences after colonization with the term post-colonial, whether it is with America. Now we know it's an imperial nation, it's almost an emerging imperial nation. But there had been a time when America also was under the power of or under the rule of certain other colonial imperial powers. But this post-colonialism with the hyphen is definitely referring to some experiences, the experience after that particular colonization. Say in the case of India, it is with the Britishers, many other Asian nations. We have the experience of colonization and what is after that. That's how, and again, you know, we got independence. Each nation has its own particular year, date on which that declaration of independence took place. But immediately after that, this theory doesn't come into being. It had been there as an idea, But it takes time to develop the importance or to find out or to come up with such a theory and the importance of this or such a movement and what is the relevance of this post-colonialism. Why post-colonialism? After colonialism, you have independence. So why do you need a theory to discuss these problems? And again we know, we have to know this is what is the importance of this theory. What is the aim of such a movement or theory in general? And the most crucial and important question remains there even now. Do we have freedom, actual real freedom, after once the imperial powers leave the country or colonies? So this is a very relevant question in that regard. So that this year is very important. You can see the 1990. It's highlighted. Why? Post-colonial criticism. Post-colonialism is an idea. It comes into being. And then post-colonial criticism, any criticism is ultimately connected with or immediately connected with something creative. So it has much to do with the literature, creativity and other art forms. And it says very particularly that it emerged as a distinct category only in the 1990s. It is not mentioned. For instance, in the first edition of Selden's or Reader's Guide to Contemporary Literary Theory, it should be in capitals. I'm sorry, it is forgotten to see in italics. It's not given in italics, but it's the name of a text. Should be in italics. Then, or say in 1985, even it was not referred to as or not mentioned with that much regard. That means it took time. After independence, you just count the number of years. Now, say take the example of Indian independence. The colonial powers leaving India. It's in 48 itself. We become post-colonial. 1947, 48, 49, all those years we do not see the emerging of post-colonialism in literature, the application of the analysis using this theory in literature. So what's the reason for that? Contemporary literary theory, as Glossary of Contemporary Literary Theory in 1992. So we have to understand that. One imperial power leaves a nation, not just India. But almost all the other colonized nations have declared independence in the recent times in between that or adjacent to that. But it has gained currency through the influence of such books as, in other words, by Gayatri Chakrabarti Spivak, The Empire Writes Back by Bill Ashcroft in 1989, Nation and Narration by Homi Bhabha in 1990, and Culture and Imperialism by Edward Said in 1993. See, all these books are very relevant, prominent books in the history of post-colonial literature, post-colonial criticism, not even literature. So these influential books and these influential critics had a lot to do with the emergence of this literary theory. And see the date of the year of publication of these books. And by 1990 is referred as the exact origin, emergence, the year of emergence of this category, this distinct category of post-colonial criticism. Because these figures had much influence upon the thought, the relevance for having such a criticism, critical activity. And what kinds of texts are going to be analyzed or interpreted on behalf of this? We will see in the coming sessions. An important collection of relevant essays, though it does not use the term post-colonialism, is Race, Writing and Difference in 1986. So the details regarding its reprinting and as given there. But what is the relevance of all these works in the field of post-colonialism, post-colonial criticism? One significant effect of post-colonial criticism is to further undermine the universalist claims once made on behalf of literature by liberal humanist critics. What is that? You are going to undermine one thing which is already almost fixed. Yeah, you are declared with independence. Your nation is independent now. Britishers withdrew from our territories. So, why do you worry about it much? No longer we are under the threat of colonial powers. Is it so? With that question, and is it so, can definitely have an answer if you are aware of your socio-political context of India or whichever other third world or developing or underdeveloped nation it may be. You can definitely say a no to this question. The question is, are we really independent of all the imperialist powers, their influences, after the official declaring of the independence of particular colonized nations? Please be aware of the difference between colonizer and colonized. Colonizer is the active figure who is colonizing a nation. In the case of India and Indians and Britishers are the colonizers and Indians remained the colonized. Colonized means, yeah, you are colonized by someone else. You are objectified. You are not active there. So colonizers and colonized. Active and passive is difference, as we say like that. So here the question is, why are we worried? See, feminist criticism. If you take feminist criticism, it has its relevance because, yeah, women are suffering on the grounds of inequality, repression, many other human rights denials. They have much problems and their issues are to be addressed. So feminist criticism, the very outset itself, it's relevant and its different forms, waves, everything is relevant. But if you are very naive about or if you are very naive about looking at this official declaring of independence, so that you take for granted that after the withdrawing of the colonial imperial settlement power from a colonized nation, it immediately completely becomes independent, free. If you are taking that kind of a very naive stand, post-colonial criticism, post-colonialism, all those become irrelevant. Because you are ultimately free, you are free like anything, you don't have any colonial threat any longer. So why do you waste your time discussing all these? But we know every conscious individual is aware of the fact that just with the declaration or official declaration of independence doesn't bring the kind of freedom that is preferred by an individual of personality, of character. So you need freedom. You want to be liberated out of all the constraints, especially the modern individual with the dreams of their own, ideas and intellectual power of their own. You are learned, want to make use of that learnedness, that knowledge of yours for various purposes, to do something better for the society. But do you always get the chance? Are you free in every regard? These are questions that you can ask yourself, and immediately you will realize that official declaration of the independence of a nation, freedom for a nation, is not enough. We have issues yet remaining to be addressed. That's how post-colonial criticism becomes relevant. So, one significant effect of post-colonial criticism is to further undermine the universalist claims once made on behalf of literature by liberal humanist critics. Means, if you take all those on the surface ground, most of the nations on earth, on the globe, are free now, at least officially. You talk about a flag independence in a sarcastic manner, if you want to say. So we have to recheck the validity of such an independence. I see is there anything more to be availed? And post-colonial criticism tries to set light upon that, to find out something which is hidden, which is forgotten, or deliberately kept away from us. We have to be aware that true independence doesn't mean all this. True freedom, in the real sense of the term with all its elegance, doesn't mean this. It's far better. It is to be far better. So if we claim that great literature has a timeless and universal significance, we thereby demote or disregard cultural, social, regional and national differences in experience and outlook, preferring instead to judge all literature by a single, supposedly universal standard. Yes, the first and foremost issue, one of the major issues to be addressed is, if you categorize a particular body of literature to be great, universal, timeless, so that the newly emerging regional literature, national literature, those are kept aside, or those are relegated to some second or third positions. Like you know, even though we find it difficult to admit that we have a fascination for anything Western, and that itself is their success in establishing colonies all over the globe. Because most of us are not able to overcome the obsessive fascination for their culture, their ways, their lifestyle, everything. And in that way, if you take their literature as well, also to be the greatest, to be timeless, universal, valuable, so that when something comes from India, when something comes from Africa, oh, this is from India, this is Indian English. It is not that qualitative as British English. You may have the tendency to say so. Many people are still there who approach every Indian writer with that kind of a prejudice. Every African writer with such a prejudice. After all, it's from India. Whatever way, in whichever university, from whichever university they take degrees, they may be teaching in some of the foreign universities. Still, they are in India, they are Indians, they are Africans. You have this kind of a barrier to accept, to appreciate, because we are ultimately prejudiced, or prejudiced for the Britishers, prejudiced for the Indians. That prejudice spreads over the fascination for Britishers and the kind of biased approach towards anything non-Western or anything Eastern. So these regional national differences are to be appreciated. Actually, we have to, that's why we have Indian literature. Now we have Indian writings, you are learning that. You have a body of literatures from India, you have a paper with the title. So we are fighting back against this universalism. When you have such papers in universities, you are joining part of such a move against this universal claims of the classicist or the Western literature. You assert that these are literature worthy enough to be taught in universities. You are willingly learning that. You are enjoying the literature, literary writings from India, Indian writers. If you are not given the idea, base about it, literature, the term literature, literary creativity, everything will make you reminded of Shakespeare, Milton, such and such, British writers only. But now you know literature is not just curtailed inside, it's not something pacified inside that particular region. We also write in different Indian languages, different African languages, and in English as well. So that also is relevant. In English, if you take English as a global language, not the language of the imperialists, but it has its own reach. We don't have to fight against that idea. That's not our task here. But Indian culture, Indian system, Indian based lifestyle, if an Indian writer is presenting that with respect, validity, in English itself, it gets reach, it gets readership. So, nationwide, global readership will be allotted, be availed to Indian culture. So that Indian culture also is valuable. Indian writings are valuable. And those writings become really relevant in that regard. So this preferring instead to judge all literature by a single supposedly universal standard. But before the emerging of this post-colonial criticism, the intelligentsia had this tendency to approach and analyze everything on grounds of this universal standard. Should be like this, should be like that. Or even the touchstone method, you don't have it referred in your syllabus. Actually, it should be there. Matthew Arnold gives a touchstone method. What do you mean by touchstone? Actually, it's part of this gold checking assuring the quality of gold. For that, you try to take that particular material and you try to bring it into contact with some stone, and you try to move it against the stone so that you can understand the quality. If there is some mixing, you can definitely find it out. Touch stone. In the same way, one of the critics of the previous centuries, Matthew Arnold, actually not so remote critic, it's a very relevant critic of the British critical school tradition, but he talks about taking or keeping certain literary works as the standard against which you can assess the quality of the literary works produced later. That's very political. He is declaring, and if everyone takes that for granted, they will stick on to the standard of those writings and they will throw the literary writings creativity of the later time period from India, from other nations, even from British nation, Britain, as invalid, because they have already set a standard. So that they demand that same standard, or even far better writings may come at a later point of time in the future. But they will never accept or appreciate that, because they are blind with allotting this standard, universal standard, only for that. So post-colonial criticism is ultimately about fighting against all this. In the next passage you can see Wessex novels of Hardy. Thomas Hardy was not a new writer for you. You are aware of him. In British history of English literature, you might have come across this writer, and I am sure most of the important novels of this person also might have got introduced to you. So Wessex setting of Hardy's novel is that it's really a canvas on which Hardy depicts and examines fundamental, universal aspects of the human condition. But it becomes a routine claim that Wessex, this is ultimately the picture. You know how simulacra, before that the third stage we are in a way confused between the authenticity and the fake aspect. Like, is it so? Is it this itself or that? So Wessex novels or any other such ideal portrayals bring you the effect, that bring you the idea that this is the ultimate, this is the only possible thing, so that you try to assess everything setting the particular as the standard, that absolute. You take that as the absolute. The yardstick, alavukol, the yardstick against which you can assess everything. Thus, Hardy's books are not thought of as primarily regional or historical or masculine or white or working class novels. They are just novels. And built into this attitude is the assumption that this way of writing and representing reality is the unquestioned norm. So that you take certain writers to have such and such standard, or the desirable standard, and you take that this is unquestioned norm, N-O-R-M, norm, you know, it's rule. It is unquestioned. So everyone should write like this. A novel written not in this format is not qualitative enough to be taken or considered to be a novel at all. So that situation depicted can stand for all possible forms of human interaction. there it becomes there it brings problems, because you think that these portrayals are the best. So when an Indian writer sits down to write, should take that as the standard, or those writings as the standard ones against which they can build up their idea. Is it actually what you mean by creativity? No, that's not what you mean by creativity at all. This universalism is rejected by post-colonial criticism. So, the first or major idea or the relevance of post-colonial criticism, not even post-colonial literature, but post-colonial criticism is that this is going to reject this universalism. Who told you that the writings of those writers, the ideas given by those British writers or the imperial writers are only better or only the best? No, we will not accept that. And they are going for an outright rejection of this universalism. And what is their idea, or what is their aim after this, or aim of doing this? Whenever a universal signification is claimed for a work, then white Eurocentric, see the term Eurocentric, Europe as the center. Which is Europe? You know, all those, that particular hemisphere where almost all the imperial powers are there. So this white as the standard one, it's already instilled in us that white is the only beautiful, or white is the standard, and black as something bad. Though not taught directly or straight face to face in a classroom, you all take that for granted. How did this come? How did this idea come to you? Because of this ideological dissemination of such standards in certain cultural spaces, educational realms, in public spheres. Yeah, most of the people praise white as the standard, beauty, norm, so that you also start thinking in that way. So generation after generation, people take this idea for granted. So this universalism is rejected. Post-colonialism tries to reject this universalism because white Eurocentric norms and practices are being promoted by a sleight of hand to this elevated status. So we give that an elevated status, and it becomes unquestioned in that way, unless and until you are ready to think differently, approach these problems differently. And all others correspondingly relegated to subsidiary, marginalized roles. If you take white and Eurocentric norms only as the ultimate and the best, everything else, non-European, non-Western, get relegated to the subsidiary. What do you mean by subsidiary? Subsidiary, the next, the second, or the marginalized roles, margin and the center, center of importance. They are already attributed that feature of being the center of importance. So, we all are relegated to the secondary or marginalized roles. Our writings may be really worthy, far better than theirs. But this is from India, or this is from Africa. Their intellectual power is not valid or worthy. we were convinced of this factor. Not factor actually, that we were convinced of this idea. And we also began to take it for granted. The ancestry of post-colonial criticism can be traced to Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth. Very important that you note down all these books and the year of their publication. The Wretched of the Earth. Please try to read something on this. Try to collect details on this. That's the main ideas, what this writer, the theorist says in this, communicates in this. So, and voicing that might be called cultural resistance. We have to go for a cultural resistance. Our culture is challenged. Our identity is questioned. We are still viewed as invalids for being the part of a former colony or the third world nation or emerging or developing nation. You don't get the validity, you don't get the appreciation as a developed nation gets. But is everything fine with a developed nation? Is everything better or the best regarding culture, regarding lifestyle, thought, human values? Are they really at height? No. Positing threat over others' identity, freedom. This is not actually what you mean by culture. But they say that we have power, we have weapons, we have financial settlement. On every regard, we are the ultimate. We are the best. So if they claim, that is up to them. But we should not take it for granted for any reason. That's why this cultural resistance becomes very important. It's very relevant. So to France's African empire, see, this is African empire. Africa suffered even more than us. The pathetic fashion they suffered. Still they are suffering. Fanon, see Frantz Fanon. Frantz Fanon's text is The Wretched of the Earth, one of the major texts in post-colonial studies, post-colonial theory. He is a psychiatrist from Martinique argued that the first step for colonized people in fighting or in finding a voice and an identity is to reclaim their own past. This is the major idea that I gave in the brief introduction just before. Reclaim your past, which is not actually given to you. Your past as given by the colonizer is not your past actually. They portrayed you to be barbarous, cultureless, problematic, sensuous. But will you agree that all the Indians, all your ancestors were like that? No. So why should you take the history as given by them, the past as given by them? They portrayed the Indian system, Indians in general, according to their convenience and the ideologies and prejudices. Why should you take it for granted? After all, we are independent. You can write your own way. You can write your own ideas. You can deconstruct the given standard norms and values. Why should you hesitate? So this cultural resistance and reclaiming of the past becomes very important. You have to find a voice of your own so that you can reclaim the identity which is erased or distorted like anything according to the convenience of the colonizers. Okay, yeah, then for centuries, the European colonizing power will have devalued the nation's past. Most of the former colonies of theirs, they tried to devalue that past, the nation, their identity, their very existence. Seeing its pre-colonial era as a pre-civilized limbo. What do I mean by limbo? Limbo is the particular fetus kind of an existence before you are forming yourself as I see in the womb of your mother. You are not with the shape and size of a child. You know the form in which you get birth. But that limbo form is not at all with the shape or size of a human infant. No. So it's just a starting evolving. So that's a pre-civilized, and again they say that this is almost before our coming into your nations as the colonizers. You were pre-civilized limbo. You didn't have any civilization or culture at all. You were nothing before our coming. We came and taught you what culture is. We instilled a bit of culture in you, an iota of culture in you. That's what they claim. That's their cheapness. We should not take it for granted. Why should we take that for granted? Or even as a historical void. What do I mean by void? V-O-I-D, void. Is an absence. You didn't have a history of your own at all. That's what they say to us. To an Indian, to an African, to any other previously colonized nation. They said that you didn't have a history even to claim. You didn't have a government. You didn't have culture. You were hunting, you were making problems here and there. You didn't have a culture of your own. That's what they say. That's what they write in their books. And they give the title, very capturing titles like Indian history. History of India. But that's not the reality. Why should you take that for granted? History is textual. That idea is very important in this regard. History is not something fixed as you used it to feel or used it to think or take for granted in the past. That's not like that. History also is written by some person. So his or her ideas, ideologies, prejudices, biases, everything comes into being, influences that writings. Those discourses are tainted, blotted by that. Their ideas. If their ideas are good, if they are very lenient and very understanding, that's fine. If they write something about us, we don't have any problem. But is that what happened? Did that happen? No. They made use of their writing skills, printing technology, and any other reaching possibilities to impose this kind of a negative picture or to portray anything non-European to be ultimately the worst or the invalid or good for nothing. So we were not actually a void. Our history was not something invalid. We have a history of preferable existence. We have a history that can be presented, that is qualitative enough to be presented in front of others. But we have to take that for granted first. Otherwise, if you are willingly subscribing to their needs, their ideas, the second step of your fighting against this portrayals or going for a cultural resistance for the reclaiming of your past will never take place. Think about the rebels and think about people who easily give up. We say in the department that in whatever way you submit your writings in your project, in whatever way you write your examination, you will not be given internals out of 25, you will be given maximum of 10. Till the last semester we used to give 24 out of 25. So immediately they assume that or imagine that department declares so. And you people 4th semester BA English students, okay, they say like that, so it's okay. Should it be the way you have to, or should you question such kind of a decision or a regulation that is going to affect you very badly? Definitely you have to question, definitely you have to fight back. So this is the way, cultural resistance. For that you have to be aware of your rights. If a student does everything perfectly well, she or he has to be given the deserving marks. That is the human right based idea. Wherever you are, it's not just on in terms of education and academic records. If you deserve something, whatever it may be, you have to be allotted with that or allowed with that. It's not someone's generosity. You are claiming what you deserve, claiming the result of your hard work. So that kind of a stoic resignation to your lot within cards, lot, it's a fate. Yeah, it's our fate. Anyway, teachers decide in that way. So we should not question. No, that should not be the way. So post-colonialism is ultimately about all these. Master-slave relationship, powerful, powerless relationship, the tension in between, and how to address that. It's not just now it is not just about the tension between one nation or the other, or one nation and the other. Wherever you have this tension, stress in the ground or on behalf of power politics, you should be aware of this possible cultural resistance in terms of post-colonial or in terms of humanitarian ground, in terms of humanity, human right. So this post-colonialism is very relevant. It's as relevant as you talk about feminist criticism, feminism, racial studies. Children, both black and white, will have been taught to see history, culture and progress as beginning with the arrival of the Europeans. So we all were taught like this. Or for years, we were convinced of this fact that the history, culture, progress, everything beginning with the arrival of the Europeans, in whichever geographical space it may be. Very problematic it is. But we are taught, and most of us or majority of us take it for granted. But after the advent, after the introduction of post-colonial criticism and such other studies or interpretations, the situations begin to change. Nowadays we can see a lot of changes in the situation. At least we are in a mood to fight back when you come across some injustices, So, in the first step towards a post-colonial perspective is to reclaim one's own past. First step is to reclaim your own past. It's already highlighted, I think. That's why reclaiming your own past. It is the first step. So that the second step is to begin to erode the colonialist ideology by which that past had been devalued. Now the second step is to erode the colonialist ideology that taught you or that compelled you to devalue your own past. That ideology was with which or is with which even now the influence is there. So was or is, both can be possible. It's not something really past or non-existing. Even now we can see the imperial influences, how we are taught to devalue our own selves and the nation and the identity of our own nation. The past had been devalued. So now it is to erode that colonialist ideology. Now it's our task to erode this colonialist ideology by which the past had been devalued. And about next that Orientalism, one of the major books by Edward Said, another important critic in post-colonial studies, we shall discuss in the coming session. Thank you so much for joining. Okay.